David Mitchell was a seasoned long-haul trucker, accustomed to the solitude of the open road. He had driven countless miles through desolate landscapes, carrying cargo from one corner of the country to another. For David, the road was both his livelihood and his sanctuary. One moonless night, as he navigated a remote stretch of highway, he spotted a lone figure on the side of the road. It was a young girl, her thumb extended in a desperate plea for a ride. David, his heart going out to this seemingly stranded traveler, pulled over. The girl introduced herself as Emily, her voice filled with gratitude as she climbed into the cab of David's truck. She explained that her car had broken down miles back, leaving her stranded in the darkness. Emily appeared to be in her late teens, her eyes holding a hint of sadness that tugged at David's heartstrings. As they drove on, Emily shared bits of her life: a troubled family, a recent breakup, and a desire for a fresh start. David, empathetic and feeling the weight of the lonely road, decided to offer her a ride beyond the nearest town. Despite her initial talkativeness, Emily gradually fell into silence as the hours passed. David attempted to engage her in conversation, but she responded with only nods or monosyllabic answers. A strange unease settled over him as he realized that her silence was accompanied by a sense of coldness that seemed unnatural. As the miles stretched on, David couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was harboring a secret, a deep, unsettling secret that refused to be spoken. He wondered if he had made a grave mistake by picking up this enigmatic hitchhiker. David decided to take a break at a roadside rest area to stretch his legs and grab a bite to eat. He invited Emily to join him, hoping to break the oppressive silence that had settled in the cab. She reluctantly agreed, but her behavior grew even more peculiar. Emily barely touched her food, her eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit rest area. It was then that David noticed her hands. The skin on her fingers was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and her nails appeared brittle and jagged. He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. As the night wore on, David's unease turned to fear. He had lost all sense of direction. The road seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, with no signs of civilization in sight. Emily's behavior had become increasingly erratic, her eyes now devoid of any humanity, filled with a strange, otherworldly light. Terrified, David demanded answers. Emily finally spoke, her voice now distant and ethereal. She revealed that she was not human, but a manifestation of the road itself, an entity that lured lonely travelers into its web, feeding on their fear and isolation. David's world unraveled before his eyes as he struggled to comprehend the surreal nightmare that surrounded him. The truck's interior seemed to warp and twist, becoming a shifting maze of endless corridors and dark, unending tunnels. Emily's true form was revealed, a grotesque, eldritch being that defied the laws of reality. She laughed as David's sanity unraveled, taunting him with his isolation and fear. He realized that he had fallen victim to a malevolent force that thrived on the loneliness of the open road. In a desperate bid for survival, David fought to regain control of his truck, pushing it to its limits. He knew that he had to break free from the entity that had ensnared him. As he sped down the ever-shifting highway, he glimpsed fleeting images of other trapped souls, their faces etched with despair. With a surge of determination, David accelerated, defying the entity's hold on him. The world around him dissolved into chaos, a maelstrom of shifting landscapes and distorted reality. He could hear Emily's unearthly laughter echoing in his ears as he fought for his life. In a blinding burst of light, David's truck burst through the nightmare's grip. He found himself back on a familiar stretch of road, the oppressive darkness, and the eldritch entity left behind. The sun was rising on the horizon, and the world seemed to sigh with relief. As he continued his journey, David knew that he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The memory of the hitchhiker would haunt him, a reminder of the malevolent forces that lurked on the lonely highways of the world. The following night was filled with restless tension. David, now cautious and paranoid, couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked just beyond his perception. He heard whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to emanate from the truck's dark corners. Emily's disembodied voice whispered his name, each syllable laced with a sinister undertone. David's grip on reality began to waver. He questioned whether he had truly escaped the entity or if it had merely loosened its grip temporarily. As he fought to stay awake, the truck's interior seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. As the miles rolled on, David's exhaustion grew, and he struggled to keep his eyes on the road. Sleep deprivation gave birth to vivid, nightmarish hallucinations. He saw Emily's grotesque form materialize before him, her elongated limbs reaching out to touch him with fingers that dripped with darkness. In his nightmares, he was trapped in a never-ending loop of the night's horrors, a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. He feared that he would lose his sanity completely, becoming one of the tormented souls bound to the road forever. With each passing mile, the road itself seemed to transform. David witnessed phantom figures in his rearview mirror, hitchhikers from another time, their faces contorted in anguish. They reached out to him, their spectral hands leaving marks on the glass, like shadows etched in despair. The truck's headlights revealed eerie scenes, a ghostly carnival of horrors that played out in the periphery of his vision. He heard the wails of forgotten souls and saw their tormented faces in the misty fog that clung to the road. Emily's disembodied voice returned, taunting David with promises of freedom if he surrendered to the entity's will. It whispered temptations and lies, trying to break his resolve. The truck itself seemed to respond to the entity's influence, its engine roaring to life with an otherworldly force. Desperate to resist, David focused on the one thing that remained constant, the rhythmic hum of the truck's tires on the asphalt. It was a lifeline to reality, a reminder of the tangible world he had known before the nightmarish journey began. Hours turned into days as David's ordeal continued. The truck's interior grew colder, and the darkness outside seemed to thicken. The entity's malevolence was palpable, a suffocating presence that clung to him like a shroud of despair. David could feel his sanity slipping further away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. He knew that the entity was playing a game with him, testing the limits of his willpower. He clung to the hope that he could outlast the entity's torment. In a nightmarish twist, the truck itself began to change. Its dimensions warped and stretched, the interior expanding into a disorienting labyrinth. David felt like a helpless insect trapped in a web of malevolent design. He stumbled through the ever-shifting corridors of his truck, pursued by phantom figures and shadowy specters. Each turn led to a different nightmare, a distorted reflection of his own fears and regrets. He knew that he was losing control of the situation, and the entity's grip grew stronger with each passing moment. In a moment of despair, David confronted the entity directly. He demanded to know its true nature and the purpose of its torment. The response was a revelation that struck fear into his heart. The entity was a collector of souls, a harbinger of despair, and a parasite that fed on the fear and isolation of those who dared to travel the lonely highways. As the entity revealed its true form, it manifested as a grotesque, amorphous mass of darkness and eyes, an eldritch abomination that defied comprehension. David knew that he was facing an ancient and insatiable evil. With newfound determination, David refused to submit to the entity's will. He fought back, his willpower a beacon of resistance in the suffocating darkness. The entity's malevolent whispers grew desperate, its form contorting in frustration. The battle of wills raged on, with David's sanity hanging in the balance. He called upon the strength of his own memories and resolve, determined to free himself from the entity's grasp. The truck's interior became a battleground of psychic struggle, a test of endurance that pushed David to his limits. As David's will violently battled with the essence of the old truck, he felt his consciousness begin to struggle beyond reality. He sensed that he was not alone in this vast nightmare. All around him was the presence of other souls lost in the darkness of this road. They were ordinary travelers who had been exposed to similar danger and despite everything lived like him. Some were shadows slowly taking shape, Others were like tortured souls clinging to his tractor in a hopeless attempt to escape the nightmare. Inside the entity, David discovered the source of its power, a shard like a twisted black branch, something like a glittering corner from a nightmare. This shard was the root of her power, and destroying it would mean a way out of the nightmare. Fighting the ghosts, tricking them, and distracting them in every way possible, David began to make his way towards the place where the shard was kept. In every soul he saw moments of horror and despair, and it gave him the strength to continue. Upon reaching the shard, David felt the fire of the fight that quelled his fear and anxiety. He chained the shard and pulled, preparing for the final battle. The entity groaned, trying to hold on, but David was determined. His fingers burned, but he didn't give up. With a grin in his hands, he ripped it away from the entity. With a grin separating him from his essence, David suddenly found himself on an ordinary road, bathed in morning light. The essence was shattered, and he was free. With heavy inspiration and recognition of his power, David continued on his way. He realized that he had emerged from this nightmare with something more than just life, with a living lesson about the power of determination, sacrifice, and hope. After many hours and days had passed, the road finally neared its conclusion. David stepped out onto a normal freeway, and the ominous nightmare that had befallen him was gone. His truck was old and tormented like himself, but it was free. David realized that he had experienced something incredible that would change him forever. David continued on his journey, but now he wasn't just an ordinary trucker. His encounter with the entity had left him with something of a gift: the ability to sense signs of its presence and warded off other potential victims. He told his story to many, hoping to warn others against similar nightmares. Some of his listeners thought he was crazy, but others recognized him as a protector and follower, seeking to spare others from the terrible fate that had befallen him. Over the years, David became an accomplished historian of the nightmares of the road. He met many people who had also fallen into a nightmare but were unable to get out. Some of them became his close friends, others remained forgotten. Each time he found a new victim of the entity, he took them under his protection, helping them to cope with the nightmare. Over time, he gathered a colony of survivors who banded together to fight the horror that awaits anyone who embarks on a solitary journey. As the years passed and David grew older, he made his final journey. He knew that one day the entity would come for him, but he was ready. Together with his friends who survived because of him, they would face the sunset of their days knowing they had each other. Their colony was a bright spot on this dark road, and they continued to fight for survival and hope. David walked away knowing that he left his mark, and that his story will be carried on by others ready to protect those who journey along the endless roads.